Thank you for joining us. This is, man, I think a third or fourth interview in a series that we've put together at Diligent Plans to provide resources during this time of crisis and afterwards. So this is another part of that series. Also, I would encourage you, if you're tuning in, to check out our webpage, diligentplans.com. We have some other resources there that are free to you during this time. One of those is coaching. We'd love to connect with you and see if we can help walk you or a team through this time of crisis. But listen, I'm very fortunate today to have my good friend, longtime friend, Gabe Smith, on the call as an interview today. And let me just give you some highlights about Gabe. As with all these interviewees, there's so many things I could list, but in the interest of time, I just hit some highlights. West Point graduate, former Army Ranger and combat veteran. Also, after the military, he got out and he started an international nonprofit across multiple continents and was very successful. In fact, it still exists today, going well past the infancy mark for a business, and been successful. Reached so many thousands of people internationally. Gabes has run many retreats and different things. Thousands of people reached, hundreds of teams. Man, we're very fortunate today. He's going to share some insight into crisis management with us. So, Gabe, thank you for joining us today.
Chris, it's such a pleasure to be here.
Gabe, there's so many routes we could go with what I know of your background, but what is your expertise with crisis management?
Yeah, I grew up in a home with two younger brothers, so I think my experience with crisis management started pretty early.
Nice.
Three boys. I think the ultimate crisis manager was probably my mom. But then at an early age, like you, went to West Point. And, I think one of the aspects of that education is that you're thrown into crisis on purpose right away. And I was 17 years old. And so really from the time I was 17, the journey at West Point really launched, I think, my journey in crisis management.
Awesome. Yeah, there's many things to draw on. It sounds like maybe we should get your mom on for one of the interviews in the future. Sounds like she might have some stories.
She would. I don't know if we want those public, but I think there'd be some good nuggets there.
All right, good deal. Well, hey, Gabe, like most of us our age or roughly around our age, in the military, we experienced 9/11 firsthand. All of us had different experiences. What was your experience in the wake of the attack on September 11th, 2001?
Yeah, so I was stationed at the 3rd U.S. Infantry, the Old Guard, at Fort Myer, which is in Arlington, right across the street from the Pentagon. And of course, we graduated in 99. And so the first couple of years as a brand new second lieutenant, I spent there with the Old Guard. And it was really, as you remember, Chris, it was a peacetime Army. We hadn't had a serious shooting war in quite some time. And in many ways, I tell people, like, it was a dream job. It was, I got paid to go and blow things up and play in the woods with my friends. And it was very much a 9-to-5 job at that point. I was newly married. Janet and I got married 2 weeks after graduation from the academy. It was a wonderful first assignment to live in Washington, D.C., and just get to partake in all that city has to offer. So really, pre 9/11, I sort of had this idyllic Army experience, I think. And on the morning of September 11th, I was a platoon leader. I was actually the Presidential Salute Battery commander. So we were responsible for firing the 21-gun cannon salutes for the president and arriving dignitaries. So it was a pretty cool job. And that particular morning, I got up at about 3 o'clock and we rolled out to a range. We were actually an HE-4 range, which is a shoulder-fired rocket. And we were in for a day of fun of shooting rockets and blowing things up with my 56 soldiers, and some soldiers from some other units were with us as well. And so we were about 60 miles away from the Capitol when the plane actually hit the Pentagon, because we were out at that range. Wow. And I'll never forget it. We had just fired the first rocket downrange, and a call came over the radio, because this was before we had cell phones. If you remember that, cell phones existed, but we were too poor back then to have a personal cell phone.
That's right.
And so the radio crackled to life in my Humvee at the range, and range control said, "Hey, you gotta pack up and return to Fort Myer." And I was pretty perturbed at that point. I had no idea what was going on. Of course, the guys were pretty upset. So we packed up and we headed out. And as we got on I-95 and then eventually 395, we got somewhere near the Springfield interchange, and it was a huge traffic jam. I mean, all of a sudden, just complete standstill at 9:30 in the morning, and which was unusual. And so we wondered what was going on, and still had no idea. There was no information coming over the radio at that point. And so, because I had orders to return back and that there was some kind of an emergency, I actually got out of the lead vehicle and led this convoy of Army trucks along the shoulder of the highway around all the cars. And we eventually made it to the police barricade, and the state trooper led us through. And then this was like one of the most surreal moments of my life. Was September 11th, probably about an hour after the attack on the Pentagon, driving in the lead vehicle in a convoy down 395, and we were the only cars on the road.
Wow.
And as we crested there's a point in that road where you crest the hill and you can kind of see the Capitol in front of you. And as we crested that point of the highway, you could just see this giant plume of smoke in front of us. And I remember that there was, fighter jets flying low all over, and everything else was really still. No other traffic, no one out.
Wow.
And it was a very surreal moment. At that point, I knew something had happened. And as I look back, that was really the moment where I was launched into the biggest crisis of my life at that point.
Gabe, when you crested that hill, and by the way, getting Humvees past vehicles on the shoulder is an accomplishment. A Humvee is like as wide as a car and a half, right? I mean,
yeah,
how you did that, man. Especially in those roads in the DC area. But when you crested that hill and you got that view for the first time, could you share what was going through your mind at that point, if you remember?
Yeah, I remember shock, and it was like a giant plume of smoke. So I knew it wasn't just a fire. It clearly looks like an explosion of some kind. And so my first thought was, because our unit was also responsible for, we were the force that was supposed to protect the Capitol in the event of an attack. And so my first thought was, we've been attacked somehow by a missile or some foreign force or something. So I immediately kind of started going through my contingency plans of what our responsibility was, and what our mission was supposed to be. And I'm sure I was nervous. I was young, early 20s. I mean, it's unreal the amount of responsibility that the Army placed on us as lieutenants, as 23, 24 years old, responsible for 50 men and millions of dollars worth of equipment. It's pretty incredible. But I'm sure I was nervous being so young and just feeling the weight of that responsibility. And I do remember just thinking, I got to get these guys back safely to Fort Myer. That's kind of my first mission.
First mission, taking care of the troops, huh? Getting everybody back.
Right. Absolutely.
What kind of information was coming in at that time? Had you gotten a grasp yet as you're making your way back on what had happened and the gravity of everything?
No. So I rolled in, and my platoon, because we were the salute battery platoon, we had the LMTV trucks, the heavy trucks that could tow the guns. And So as we entered into Fort Myer and we pulled up behind our barracks, the first person I saw was our '06 regimental commander. And, when you're a second lieutenant, what you don't want to see is an '06 waiting for you.
Yeah.
So Colonel Laufenberg was standing there waiting for me. And as I jumped out of the truck, he grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, Gabe, something's happened at the Pentagon. We're not sure exactly what's happened. There's also something happening in New York City. I want you to load up your trucks, all your men. I want you to be prepared to be gone for 3 days. And I want you to go find out how the old guard can help. And that was it. And so with that little bit of information, I briefed my platoon sergeant, squad leaders, and we prepared to be gone for 3 days, loaded up some MREs and radios and equipment, and then headed out.
Wow. And then so you made a beeline to the Pentagon best way you could, and you get there. And what was your initial mission, and then what did that evolve into as you spent some days on the ground there at the Pentagon?
Yeah, so we were pretty familiar with the Pentagon because we would conduct ceremonies there. And I remember, kind of coming up to the turnoff, and that there was no fence because the fence had been knocked down by the plane, actually skipped over and bounced and knocked the fence over and the light post on the highway over. So we drove up just onto the lawn on the side where, of course, at that point, there was still a raging fire happening. And my mission was vague: go see how you can help. So I left the men in the trucks, told them to wait, jumped out, tried to go find somebody in charge. And one of the things in crisis is that there's chaos. And in that particular event, it wasn't clear who was in charge, which is a strange thing at somewhere like the Pentagon.
Right.
So I went looking for somebody who was in charge. At that point, there was just people running around everywhere with burns, torn clothes. As I approached the crash site, a 2-star general with his shirt untucked and burns on his uniform grabbed me and said, Lieutenant, we need you over here. And he tried to direct me in a certain location, and then he took off running. And I eventually connected with an engineer platoon that was waiting to do to actually rescue people, because at that point we thought that there was probably folks still trapped inside. So the fire department was trying to put out the fire. Wow. I attached myself to an engineer unit and went and got the guys and came back and briefed them that our mission was to see if we could recover survivors. So we got equipment from the engineers and we waited. The fire was so intense you couldn't get within about 100 yards of the building. So we sat there on a knee and waited for the fire to die down so that we could go and find survivors. That was our first mission.
Wow. What was the aura of your men at that time? So as you're sitting there as a leader waiting to kind of go into the fire, I mean, in this case, literal, how were your troops? What were they feeling? What did you pick up from them as kind of like, I don't know, just where they were mentally and things?
Well, yeah. So I think 2 things come to mind, Chris. One, that one of the things about being a soldier is you long for action. You want to be where the action is. You want to be a part of whatever's going on. So I think that at that point there was a lot of adrenaline and excitement that we were the first unit from the old guard sent over, and there was a lot of excitement about that.
Yeah.
I think the other aspect is we were the old guard, and so the old guard, of course, does high level ceremonies, and so these were young men who were accustomed to pressure and working under pressure. And so I don't think that we felt anxious or nervous. I think at that point we were just excited to be there, and of course not really grasping the gravity of what had happened, or certainly what we would eventually do. I think we were just excited to get in there and help. which is also an aspect of, I think, soldiers want to help.
Yeah.
But that mission never materialized. The fire, it took hours for them to put the fire out. And then our mission transitioned after it got dark and they got the fire out enough for us to get close. There was, at the impact point, there was a place where the bottom floors were removed, and the building was going to collapse further. And so we were given the mission to go and build wooden pylons to support the rest of the building. And so our mission changed from a search and recovery operation to a construction operation. So working at night, covered in jet fuel with, at that point, that's when we first saw the first bodies on the ground, and we could see bodies just inside the building. And we worked through the night to build those pylons.
And I think when you first told me the story, you were wading through jet fuel, right? Like it was up your body to a certain level. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, the unbelievable amount of water that they used, of course, to put out that kind of fire. And so it ended up being this like mix of debris and water from the fire hoses, and then the leftover jet fuel and different liquids that were part of the plane, I guess. So it was real messy. It was super dark. I guess that kind of defined that crisis, as just dark, and no one still at this point. It was very unclear what had happened, and what we knew that a plane had hit the building because it was pieces of the plane strewn across the lawn. And we began to get some news, though not a lot of news, because again, no one had cell phones at that point. So you're leading in a situation with not much information, with an evolving mission, changing by the hour. So it was pretty intense.
How did you keep morale and motivation up, without information? So it's one thing if you know what you're getting into and you know the duration, the end point, but you had no bookend on the backside, and you didn't know at this point whether we were being attacked as a nation on our homeland or what. I'm sure the troops came to you and asked those questions, and how did you manage the response to that?
Yeah, so one of my leadership principles, Chris, is the ability to zoom in and zoom out on a situation. And so, I think that's one aspect of leadership that's so important, especially in a crisis, is figuring out, when do I need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture and, think strategically, and when do I really need to zoom in and just look a little more myopically at the situation right before me. And so in that moment, I chose to zoom in because, zooming out and there wasn't a lot of information. I didn't really know what the bigger picture was. So I focused on zooming in on our particular mission and keeping the guys safe, keeping them organized. I mean, it was a great platoon with amazing NCOs, non-commissioned officers. And so, I had great leaders around me who had a lot of experience, truthfully more experience than I had.
Yeah.
Some of them had already seen combat. And so at that point, it was really just about keeping the younger guys focused on the task that we had to do, and just keeping them safe and make sure, the standard things of, drink more water, make sure you're not getting dehydrated.
Right.
So,
wow. So, man, Gabe, so what I'm hearing there in that zoom in, zoom out, and what a gem of leadership that you offered there. So in this crisis today with COVID-19, if we zoom out and try to look strategically, there's no information. We don't know the bookends. We don't know what's going to happen. So would you say it's valuable today for us to kind of zoom in and control what we can control, which is our day-to-day routines and keeping, drinking water and staying fit and things like that? Would you say that's valuable now for most leaders in this crisis?
I think, Chris, you named, like, for me, one of the key principles of crisis leadership that's super important for leaders in today's environment is to focus on what to be reality, and to really focus on the things that you can shape and control, and realize that as we go through this crisis, we're becoming someone. So one of the questions that I'm asking myself in this crisis is, who do I want to be when I emerge on the other side? And so, it's an opportunity really to reshape some habits, to form maybe some new relationships, to focus in on the work that I have, and to offer what I have in my hand to others with generosity. And I found that, doing all those things really is enough to occupy my head and my heart right now.
Wow, man, some great wisdom there, Gabe. Who are you becoming in the crisis? If I look back a month and a half ago and compare that person and what I was doing to right now, that didn't even look the same. I wasn't virtual. We weren't virtual as a company at all, really. And now we're 100% virtual. That's some wisdom there. So as the days went on, your mission changed. Remember you telling me, and what ultimately did the thing that really is burned into your mind, I imagine, is this next part. And what did that mission become for everybody listening?
Yeah, so the next day, my platoon was actually the first of our unit to enter the building after it was secured and the fire was out. And from that point, for the next 3 weeks, the mission transitioned to body recovery and evidence recovery. And so we were put in shifts. We didn't go home. We slept in tents right there on the lawn of the Pentagon. I remember every morning, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld would come and inspect the crash site, and our tents were right by where they would show up and stand there and survey the progress. And my platoon was on the night shift, so we slept all day, and then in the evening we would suit up in these white Tyvek suits with respirators, and we would enter the building, and we'd be given a sector, and in that sector, basically we would clean up the debris, recover the bodies that we found, and then we would find evidence. I remember one of the pieces of evidence that we found was actually an intact ID card from one of the terrorists, and that was, of course, one of the pieces of evidence that was used to unravel the plot. And so it was hard physical labor. It was hard mentally. Just to be, every night, 7 days a week for 3 weeks to be in an environment like that. It was hard emotionally as well. And so people coped in different ways with all those realities, but it was tough. It was a tough mission. And, as I look back at that time, I think about leaving home, kissing my wife goodbye, leaving for what I thought was a day at the range. Having no idea that the world would change that day, and then I wouldn't return home for 3 weeks, and I would be a very different person when I came home after that as well.
Yeah. Did you have contact with your family during those 3 weeks, Gabe?
So I think it was the Salvation Army handed out cell phones, if you can imagine that. Wow. And so they handed us cell phones, and we were able to use them to call home briefly. So there wasn't a lot of contact, but there was some contact.
Well, there's a couple points. One of them, you said you were changed for pretty much forever until you, I think you took a deep dive into it in recent times to continue to process. What did you know that you were changed, Gabe? Did you, when you got back to real life or whatever that was at that time, which was different, and in many parallels to this crisis, normal's coming, but it's going to be different than the normal that we knew. So normal returned from you, but it was never the same as it was prior. So were you able to see these changes that happened in you initially after the crisis, or?
I knew that emotionally I was off. It was hard just to go home and just, like you said, to go back to normal and back to a normal marriage, back into, normal life. And some things, of course, weren't normal. The world was really different. of course, as an infantry soldier in the Army, we quickly went to war, and that shaped, a whole extended season of life for me as well. I would say my wife, Janet, in recent years, as we processed it, she said she noticed right away that I was different, that I was more, emotionally stunted. And I think this is an important part of dealing with crisis that I, as an older man now, I would advise my younger self, and give myself permission to actually grieve what was happening. Because I think, as a young guy, I just did what I needed to do, which is just to stuff all those emotions. And, we sent lots of guys to counseling from the platoon. I never felt like I could go to counseling. I felt like that was probably a sign of weakness. And, now at 42 years old and having been through counseling, and I think every leader should have a counselor. That'd be another, nugget of wisdom I would offer. But, I think we have to give ourselves permission to grieve that, something has been taken from us even in this crisis, that things are not going to be the same. And so there is a place for optimism, but I think there's a place for grief as well, because that's what allows us to be fully present, fully alive in the crisis and after the crisis. And I would say I didn't do that as a young man. And it took me the better part of 15 years to really process everything that I had experienced and really to regain that part of me that had been lost as a result of that crisis, and then the crisis of combat and all the other things that followed later.
Well, I'm so glad you're sharing this, Gabe. So you went on, like you just mentioned, to combat in the war on terror and saw, firefights and things like that. The thing, and I've not been to combat as a point of clarity, but what I've learned from guys like yourself, friends of mine, people I've talked to, is, in a firefight, it's high intensity, short duration. And so you spike, you do what you have to, you come down. So you were in a high intensity, long or moderate duration. And now this COVID-19 thing is this thing is moderate to high intensity, long duration, because we don't know. So I think one of the keys you mentioned there was, wow, you got to take care of yourself. You got to allow yourself to grieve. And, I just want to speak just real quickly to the leaders that are watching this. You are not made of steel. Your calling and your mission is so critical. We need you in the fight. Your teams need you in the fight for a long time. So I think what Gabe is advising is to have someone that you can talk to. And at the end, you're going to see contact info for our company, myself, and for Gabe. If you don't have anybody, you do now. Gabe has a heart for helping. I do. The rest of our team does. So, man, you're running at red line. A lot of leaders out there. Don't allow your engine to blow up, because you can't sustain it for a long time. So, thanks for sharing that, Gabe. I think that's so valuable. And, as young, tough guys, we dismissed the notion that we had limits, right?
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of the things that we probably had that going into the military. That's one of the reasons we were attracted to that. But I think it was definitely ingrained in us even further. And I know that's one of the things I've carried into, the rest of my adult life, that has benefits, but also has a cost. There's a benefit to being the kind of person who can persevere. And perseverance is certainly, an admirable quality. But like you said, Chris, there's wisdom in realizing that we are finite, that we're not Superman, and that there's a cost, when we don't take care of ourselves, when we try to bear the weight of the world, whether you're a business leader, an entrepreneur, lots of people struggling, like bearing the weight of their world right now. And I would agree with you, just to say, you're not meant to go it alone and carry that kind of weight. And so, you definitely need friends and colleagues and help. And we love being that kind of help to other leaders, for sure, because we've been there.
Absolutely. It reminds me of the evolution of one of our primary weapons, one that you were very familiar with in the infantry, the M16, which was the primary weapon of the infantry soldier, during Vietnam, had a selector switch that you could move to fully automatic. And that would just mean pull the trigger and the rounds fly, and it doesn't stop until you let go of the trigger. And what we realized was in later models of the M16 and later the M4 was that automatic selection was not very efficient. So they changed it to 3-round bursts, 1, 2, 3 rounds, and then it would stop until you squeeze the trigger again. So I think that maybe that same concept would apply to leaders. Short burst could be high intensity and probably is, but you gotta take a rest between the bursts, man. You can't just go full auto, or you're gonna blow the whole bandolier of ammunition before the end of the fight.
Absolutely. That's why I think for me, two of the lessons I've learned in recent years is that managing priorities is more important than managing time. And managing energy is critical. Because I think, especially the older we get and the more responsibility we have at home and in our careers, we have to really manage priorities and manage energy. And I think those two disciplines are incredibly important right now in a time of crisis, just to pay attention to the reality that, our levels of energy are not going to be the same as they were pre-COVID. Because we have additional burdens we're bearing. And so that's going to erode energy, and we have to pay attention to that.
Yeah. It almost reminds me of, watching a movie. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but where there's the person and then the soul kind of comes out of the body and watches the person that's left. So we kind of have to separate ourselves from ourselves, right? And look and see what's happening and kind of be very in tune with some of those extra things that you said were piled on us during this time.
No, for sure. And I think it helps to have trusted friends and colleagues around us that can act like a mirror, that we trust and say, that regularly ask us how we're doing, and then call us out when they recognize our answers aren't genuine.
Yeah, I did one interview ago. I interviewed Laura McKenna, and she basically called me old and tired because I sent her an email at like 3 a.m. or 1 a.m. And so she called me out right on the interview. And she was right. I was up late and I was working, and I realized because of her comment that I had been up late and working many nights after this whole thing kicked off. So, trusted advisors. Gabe, so in this time, on that theme, do you think accountability is a critical part for leaders to stay sharp during this time? Accountability of some, of our basically our workloads and different things.
I really do. I think that we need reference points. And I'm remembering, Chris. You remember what it was like to do night land navigation when we were in the military. And I'm just going to confess, like, I was actually terrible at navigation in general, but especially at night was incredibly challenging for me. And but one of the things you learn is that having a reference point, knowing your starting point is incredibly important before you start any journey where you have to navigate. And I think about the situation we're in is a lot like the situation I was in at the Pentagon, where it was dark. There was not a lot of information. There was chaos. It's uncertain who's in charge, really uncertain what's going on. And so what you really need is a reference point to start from. And back in those days, my reference point was my small mission. Build this pylon. Go in this building. And so I think we do need reference points in our lives. And I think a relationship with someone who can be honest with us, where we can process what's going on, where we can have really a partner to discuss what is real, what's not real, is really important, because that provides a reference point to say, I am here, and at least I know that.
Man, that's so good, Gabe. When you wake up in the middle of the night and you're stumbling your way to the bathroom or to get some water, you're initially disoriented, but then you fix eyes on that one little LED the size of a pencil eraser across the room on some device that we have, and then you kind of have that place to orient. I think the younger versions of ourselves, based on what you said and what I'll admit now, wouldn't have asked for any LEDs. We just kind of, we're going to go do it, and we can conquer the world ourselves. But now I look back, I wish I would have asked for people to be that LED in the night, that source of direction, and in some cases encouragement and hope. So do you think it's important as leaders watching this who have teams to kind of illuminate for their team members and be that LED in the middle of the night so they can orient? You think it's important to take a proactive stance in that?
Absolutely. We have to, in my language, I've got 7 principles of crisis leadership. And one of those is go together. There's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think we want to go far. We want to make it through, these current circumstances. And so I think now more than ever, it's important to go together. And I think we each have a responsibility to look out for the people on our left and right, and at least take responsibility for one other person, one other leader around us, and make sure that we're going together through this thing.
I really find encouraging. I don't know if I ever shared this with you directly, but if not, I am now. So every once in a while, when you call me and say, Yeagle, health and welfare check, that's valuable to me, Gabe, because there's some days you've caught me where I wouldn't have called anyone, but I've been hurting, and you call. I would say it's probably divinely influenced through you, but you call and you ask that, and I share one thing at the end of it. I feel so much better, but I wouldn't have done it on my own. So I appreciate you for that.
Oh, thanks, Chris. I mean, it's reciprocal. I mean, your friendship's been a gift, and I think that's the whole really underlying basis of Diligent Plans is that to just love your vision of being a company of men and women who look out for each other. And I think we do that well, which is what makes this work so meaningful. And I think that's what we're really trying to do is just offer an extension of who we are together to others. So you're welcome, and thank you for doing the same.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked about as a company and individually together is this notion about leadership. It's very depleting. It's difficult. But that doesn't diminish the value of the calling. So, I think when you're kind of in your own space, especially during this time, and you just want to kind of close down for the day and kind of, shut down, but you kind of push through that anyways, and you call somebody or you send them a text or you connect with them. I think you're really doing the nitty gritty work of leadership that's required, because man, that text, you don't know how that's going to resonate on the other end. You don't know how that quick phone call is going to change someone's day. There's a lot of families that are hurting right now in the home. And heck, I read an article, even pets are out in disarray, where the whole food chain, the order of things has shifted, and there's chaos. So I think running towards people and connecting is really valuable. So
no, couldn't agree more. I think that's just practically, I think that's one of the easiest ways to stay encouraged, and to have a real purpose is to do exactly what you said, is just to reach out every day to at least one person in our circle and just really ask what I think is the most powerful leadership question in the world: how are you? And just sit and have the capacity to listen and remember that people are not problems to be solved. I like to say we're mysteries to be uncovered. We're all tangled up mysteries, but I think that question and creating the space just to listen is incredibly important.
Wow. And when you ask that question, I think you have to be ready to dig a little deeper, because, what do most people say? Oh, I'm doing great. Doing great, Gabe.
That's right.
Yeah. If you believe that one, I'll tell you another one. So you got to dig a little deeper and have that willingness to kind of call them on their first response.
That's right.
Gabe, is there man, so leading up to the events that happened with you at the Pentagon, I'm sure you might have done some things differently to prepare. Maybe we'll do that on a separate interview. Maybe we'll talk about that, because right now we're in it. Is there anything that you wish you would have done differently when you were in the crisis, in the response, that maybe would be valuable to anyone listening, since we're all kind of in it right now? Is there anything during the storm that you would offer that may be helpful?
Yeah, I think as a young lieutenant, I had this too much of the sense that it's all up to me, um, and I need to be the one to figure it all out. I need to be the strong one. And as I look back, and I'm connected even on Facebook now with some of the amazing non-commissioned officers and other leaders that were in my unit. And as I think back on those days, one thing's really missing, and that's that I did not really share the burden with those other leaders. And I was surrounded by, incredibly competent, experienced, caring leaders that would have gladly shared the burdens of a young 20-something lieutenant trying to figure it out. And but because I had this belief that it's up to me and I need to be the strong one and I need to have all the answers, I didn't do that. And I think I really missed out on an opportunity to maybe have the impact of those circumstances have less burden, but also like just building friendships, and then maybe I could have offered other leaders in that space as well. So that's something I would do differently now, as I would spend more time collaborating and sharing the burden.
Wow. Yeah, sometimes we get into that vicious cycle of, if it is to be, it's up to me, right? So
that's right.
That's really good. Hey, Gabe. So this has been great, and I think a lot of people listening have probably really connected. You're such a communicator, one of the greats of our time, I believe. Hey, if you could give people a few takeaways, maybe 1 to 3, just things that they could apply to their life right now, even if they don't understand the theory behind it and where it comes from and why it's effective, which honestly, when we're in it, that's not really important. It's just the fact that they tuned in and they developed some kind of trust for you as a subject matter expert in crisis. What are one to 3 things that you would share with people tuned in right now?
Yeah, Chris. Well, as I've thought through this and what I would have to offer others, I've developed 7 principles of crisis leadership. And I think my top 3 of those would be: number 1, define reality. I've always said that's the first job of leadership, is defining reality. And I think now more than ever, we're in a media saturated environment. If you go on 2 different news sites, you get 2 different versions of what is real. And I think as leaders in the worlds that we're responsible for, that's one of our primary responsibilities, is just to name what is real, as almost like back to the conversation we just had, as a starting point. Because I think the people that we lead need a starting point. They need a rallying point. So I think defining reality would be number 1. Number 2, flowing out of that, creating and communicating a clear plan. Is that I think there is a tendency when we don't have a lot of information, we're people who are used to having 80% certainty and then being able to make a decision. And in a crisis, you only have 20% certainty, and you have to be able to make and communicate plans out of 20% certainty. And that's a challenge, because we're just not used to doing that. Feels uncomfortable, but I think it's so important to care for people and the organizations that we lead, that we owe it to others to clearly communicate good plans, even if those plans change tomorrow. That today we need to communicate a clear plan. And then the last one is something I mentioned earlier in our conversation, is go together. And I think that's probably the most important right now, is don't go alone. Don't bear the burden alone. Just go together. So define reality, communicate a plan and go together is what I would offer to the folks listening today.
Wow, really good. So, if you're watching this, I would encourage you to just apply those things to life to your life. In many ways, you're that source of clarity and planning for people that are looking up to you. And so bring them into it and take them with you, like Gabe says. Hey, Gabe, this has been really valuable. Heck, every time I talk to you, I learn something, even as a facilitator of an interview. So thank you so much for your time. Those of you out there that are watching and you'd like to connect further with Gabe, Gabe is one of our crisis coaches and many other things at Diligent Plans. You can connect with him through our website, diligentplans.com. And also, if you want to email him directly, gabe@diligentplans.com is a great way to get a hold of him. Again, man, thank you for your time and your friendship and your willingness to share what you've learned through some pretty trying experiences with the world. It says a lot about you as a leader and as a person.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's been an awesome experience.